You're right. It is recording. Yay! All right. So as we are going to be talking about The Chosen Season 2, Episode 1, I'm just going to start off with the very simple questions. What stood out to you and what did you like as you were watching it? Yeah, Jim.
Well, the first thing I noticed was that the sets were so much more realistic than in season 1.
Sure.
And then that I noticed in the credits at the end that they gave credit, they apparently used, what was it, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They had some kind of sets.
Yes.
That they had that were very realistic. It was all filmed in Texas. And at Fair Park. Some of it was at Fair Park.
Oh, wow.
Midlothian.
Uh-huh.
It was interesting. Just the last page of the credits, you can see all that.
So there we go. We'll have to do a field trip. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Richard.
I really like when Jesus did the too soon joke.
Oh, yeah. That was good. Yeah.
I liked when Jesus was laying on the ground fixing that cart for the water, as it was.
Yeah. Yeah, he was able to fix his cart and kind of.
Positive about it, and have you up and moving out just real soon.
Yep.
Hand me the pitch.
He was a carpenter.
I was going to say he learned well from his dad, so he was a carpenter, so it was a natural thing. But yeah, he was still doing it to help others. Anything else? Yeah.
I noticed how important downtime was with him. Me time. To pray, just to get away.
Yep.
And you see that in the scriptures as well. And they have to pray.
It's one thing for those of you who are professors. There's always going to be a student who's, I've got a question. What about this? Okay, now I'm off to the next lecture. Now I'm off to the next thing. What am I going to do that's next? And so when do you actually have time to eat? When do you have time to breathe? When do you have time to simply go, what's next? When do you have time to pray? It's a good reminder for all of us, because how many of us in our own busy lives don't have our schedule so jam-packed that we're like, okay, where are we running to next? And especially when we're talking about kids and their programs, there's always something to be running to. The question is, will you be running to it? Anything else? The two that I really appreciated in this episode were the sons of thunder, James and John. In the very first instance, we see them actually working the land, taking care of a field, but it's not their field. They don't even know the owner of it. They thought the seed was going for strangers, travelers. Yet because of the work that they had done, they thought more highly of themselves. Well, look what Jesus is asking us to do. We're in the know, and you guys are not in the know. Does that sound familiar to anyone? And yet, when they do recognize their own power and authority, what is it that they want to do to the Samaritans that are making fun of them or spitting at them? Does anyone remember what the line was?
The lightning strike.
That's right. We have to strike them with lightning. Let the fires of heaven rain down upon them. Let them know the pain of God. Yet why was Jesus there? Not to bring the wrath, but to overcome the generations' torment, of animosity, and to begin that relationship anew. Yeah, Cheryl.
Well, it certainly wasn't the easiest way to follow Phil. They didn't take the easy way out. They could have had Burl or someone
Could have.
take that with those big stones with the plow.
If you were wealthy enough to own a burro, if you were wealthy enough to have a livestock animal in order to have that, if you did not have that and all you could afford was the land, what we saw was the way that they worked the land.
I guess you could have a life for it.
If you're volunteering, Jim, we're hearing it. It's true though. Husband and wife often worked side by side. Oftentimes you had children for the sake of laborers. That's why they had 12, 15, 20 children over the course of so many years. Yes, we do call that a litter, or now in modern time, a basketball team or a baseball team. But back in the day, that was normal, so that the farm could continue. Anything else that really stood out to you? Yeah, Jim.
Now, this first program was supposed to be about James, the brother of Jesus, the epistle.
No, not quite. So this is James and John, the fishermen.
Okay. They had him interviewing his mother.
Yes.
Or,
Gotcha. Oh, yes. I was thinking of the disciples when they were out.
right.
Yes, at the very beginning when he's taking notes and writing from everyone, we actually have John who's going to be writing the Gospel of John.
Okay.
Because if you recognize he's really struggling with how do I want to begin? Where do I want to begin? Well, should we start with Abraham? Well, but there's so much that goes on before them. Do we want to start? And so in John's gospel, he starts, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
So that was John that was interviewing Mary.
Mary, and he also interviewed others, if you notice, too.
Right.
And Mary also mentioned too, well, Matthew's going to be writing his account. And John's response was, well, he's going to write down what he was a part of, what he saw. I'm going to write down something very different. Matthew also is focused on a far different thing. Mary asked him, are you going to write down his genealogy? And he jokes, I think Matthew has that one covered. For those of you who don't know, the first chapter of Matthew is all his genealogy, and we're talking all the way back. And so it does fit with the character that we know of Matthew in this account, in the Chosen. He would be very detail-oriented.
Kind of like on the autism spectrum.
He is.
Very,
Yes.
almost like Asperger's.
Mm-hmm. There are other videos out there besides the episodes that give commentary as to why they did things, what they were doing, and the three religious leaders who they went to for, is this in the same light? Is this in the same spirit of the history that we're talking about? So they had a Jewish rabbi, they had an evangelical professor, and they had a Catholic priest. Who kind of helped with that. And the director is talking with him. And one of the things when they were talking about Matthew's character was we wanted someone who was probably on the spectrum. And so then that way too, if someone's watching it, they can say, well, that's like me. I'm like that. And maybe you are on the spectrum, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're just a numbers person. Maybe you're just really overly diligent. People go, what do you mean you like looking at stocks and spreadsheets and stuff like that? And you're like, I find it fun. Hopefully you can see yourself in one of the disciples too, and enter into that story a little bit differently. Good insights, though. Yeah.
How many of the disciples were actually literate? Is that known?
It's really not known. Keep in mind, though, there's a lot of Jewish people that would be literate because the Jews really did value education. And so even children went to school, especially boys. And so you went kind of like in our recent past, I'll just call it, where you went just to 9th grade in order to get an education. That was very much similar to their own understanding. They wanted you to read, they wanted you to be able to write and understand some of the basics of business, of communication, and of community. And they did it all around faith. Then, once you got to a certain age, then you went on and you got a job. But sometimes your job didn't need you to read or write, but still the Jewish people were very much about contracts. Not always written contracts, many times they were verbal contracts. You would go to the city gates and the elders would be there and they would be there to witness the contracts, the verbal contracts. It's probably known that majority of them could read, not all of them could write. Matthew, with his education and his skill, he would have been able to read and write. Much of this time too, you could have gone to someone whose job it was to read and write, a scribe. If you couldn't read, you could pay them. If you couldn't write, you could pay them, and they would do it for you. I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, but it gives you a kind of a picture of what the culture was like in the society too. So I'll flip the question. What didn't you like, or what did you struggle with as you were watching this episode? Was there anything?
I guess I wasn't sure how the
Mhm.
first 5 or so minutes talking about recording events and what Jesus had done tied in with the rest of the episode.
Sure.
That was one thing I'm not sure about. I'm sure it all ties in together somehow, but I didn't see a direct relation there.
Not always is there a direct connection. Keep in mind, this is a series that's probably going to go on for 8 years or 8 seasons. And so in some regards, they're trying to make connections from different places to different times and also get us as the reader or the listener, the watcher, to be engaged in, keep in mind, they're writing this after the fact that he's dead. He was here, he died. What do we do now? But then they also witness his resurrection. As John is taking notes, did you hear one of the people ask him, why are you doing this now? Why are you writing down these notes now? And he said, because we are together. But you're supposed to be in Shiva, mourning. One of the disciples had died, was killed. Recognizing that they were getting older, their memories will get worse as they get older, or will they even be alive for how much longer? We need to write this down for others. And so it's also a passion. In much in the same way of diaries, journals, things that we try and record for the next generation. But then so oftentimes, what does the next generation do with it? They don't understand my life. My life was way different. I've got a cell phone, computers. Oh, my grandparents would never understand. And yet at the same time too, we're watching events about 2,000 years ago. And how many of us can't connect? Well, what do we do when someone disrespects us? spits at us, calls us names, what should we do to respond? What is it Jesus is trying to teach them? How is he teaching them? Keep in mind, he's not always, okay, pull out your notebooks, it's lecture time, this is the only way to learn. Sometimes he has them go and do it, like the sons of James and John. Why did I have you work the field? To go and help someone. Was that the only reason? Or was there more? Sometimes when you were a kid and you had all that energy, you had all that time, your parents would give you tasks in order to learn how to do something. One of the best ways to learn how to hammer in a nail is to give a kid a board, a nail, and a hammer. Well, what do you do if the kid hits their thumb? They'll learn not to hit their thumb with the hammer. But what if they break their thumb? Then we'll take care of it. Sometimes learning can be hard and difficult. But this is also, too, how are we learning from others? In what ways can we learn from the mistakes and the successes of others so that we don't repeat them, or we can repeat them? It's also something to appreciate. We do have better gardening techniques. We now have machinery that is air conditioned that you can ride in, and right behind you is 48 rows of corn or soybeans or something else being planted. And you can work for 16, 18, 20 hours at a time. I can still remember when the horses were plowing and they were done for the day, they were done for the day. You can fight them all you want. They're still going to veer left towards the barn. They know what time it is because, I'm hungry. Now with machinery, we don't have that. And yet at the same time, too, are we recognizing the struggle that farmers do go through? How hard it is when food is scarce. Jesus also gives us some insights too, how it is we're taking care of those who are injured, but still a part of the world. They may be rejected by society as a whole because they tried to steal a horse and they broke their leg because of it. But how are we to reach out to them? Do you remember the other two people that had invited them for dinner in that episode? One,
Priest.
yep, one was the priest in the village, and the other one was also very powerful. Think of it like the mayor of the city.
The treasurer.
Something like that. Yes, it was. You're right. It was the treasurer of the city. So two people that had very much power, but in different realms of the community. The religious leader, who if Jesus were to go and speak to, he would be able to then continue that same message, that same sermon week after week after week. And guess what? People might show up. And then the other one is the finances. How much do you use money in your life? If Jesus was able to reach him, how much of an impact it would have on the community? Yet who does Jesus decide to go eat dinner with? The thief, the horse thief, who broke his leg, who's not even a very good horse thief, but still needs care and compassion. Anything else from this episode?
I noticed how emotionally charged us.
Yeah.
Different people. And, you know, trying to process all these emotions as the movie ends.
Mm-hmm.
And so you carry it with you.
You do? Yeah.
You try to work through it.
Mm-hmm. The chosen episodes I have found can be very rich and complex. So if you watch them just one time, you're going to get the bigger picture. If you watch it a second time, you're going to see things that you didn't notice until you watched it that second time. And sometimes I even will encourage you, watch it a third time. When we watched the first season, I also was encouraging you to share it with your family. Mindful of who or what age you want to share it with, because not everything in here is maybe the best for small children. They might not understand it, but at the same time too, like the episode, Let the Little Children Come to Me. There I am. There's Jesus. I'm there. So it can also be a powerful way to connect the family. Anything else to close out our time?
We haven't talked about the lost sheep.
We did not talk about the lost sheep. There's the parable. Absolutely. What do you recall from it?
Well, basically the shepherd cares more about the one sheep that's lost than the 99 who are not lost.
Mm-hmm.
And not the same way. Caring about the sinner and hoping that one sinner will repent.
Yep.
It ties in with God. I think this was from maybe season 1, but well people don't need a doctor, sick people do. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It all ties in with that. So,
Yep. Absolutely. What I was really struck by, though, when we were talking about the parable of the sheep and the shepherd going off and getting the one, Jesus was actually talking with, and most of the story was shared by an actual shepherd. Jesus was simply asking the question, what would you do if you lost one of your sheep? Well, it wasn't Jesus saying, well, I think you should be doing this. It was an actual shepherd, someone who did that day in and day out and said, this is what I did. This is what I would do. So Jesus was taking the ordinary life of someone, the job that may seem mundane that you're doing every single day, and connecting it to your faith. How many of us sitting in a cubicle, or maybe even being retired, think of our lives as still being in service to God? Some days, maybe when we're volunteering, maybe when we're up at the church, but what about those other times when we're at the grocery store? What about those times when we're simply driving and someone cuts us off? We could lay on the horn, absolutely. Would we feel justified? Yes, we would. Should we? Or do we need to be reminded of how it is God with them? God is with them. And God is with me. Sometimes the parables have a different light when we see them in a different way. It's one thing to read them on a sheet of paper. It's one thing to be acting them out. And it's a whole other thing to be, well, watching them. Anything else? Seeing none. Next week, we're going to talk about episode 2. I hope you enjoy it. All right. right, I'm gonna click stop this.